Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Robert Reeves looked at the girl who brought him breakfast. He had not seen her before. He had just arrived at the farmhouse the night before. The farmhouse was old and small. It was near a big bay with beautiful water and skies. Reeves was an artist who loved painting. He did not care that the farmhouse was simple, the people were quiet and plain, and the place was far from the city. He only cared about the beautiful sunsets, sunrises, moonlight, and water. The farm belonged to Angus Fraser and his wife. They were serious people who worked hard to make a living. Reeves thought they had no children. He did not know who the girl was. She poured his tea and brought him toast. She did not look like Angus or his wife. The girl's name was Helen Fraser. She was Angus's niece. She was tall and not very pretty. Her clothes were plain, and her skin was brown from the sun. She had big, dark eyes that seemed sad. Reeves wanted to talk to her, but she only gave short answers. Later, Mrs. Fraser told him more. Helen's parents are dead, and we raised her, Mrs. Fraser said. She is a good worker. No girl here works as hard as Helen. She saves Angus a lot of money, but she can be a bit stubborn. Reeves felt that Mrs. Fraser didn't like Helen. He often heard her scold Helen, but Helen never talked back. Once, he saw Helen crying after Mrs. Fraser yelled at her. This upset Reeves. One day, Reeves asked Angus and Mrs. Fraser if Helen could be his model for a painting. He said he would pay them. They agreed. Reeves told Helen his plan. He met her one evening when she was bringing the cows home. At first, her face lit up with happiness, but then she looked quiet and tired again. He walked with her and talked about the sunset and the beauty of the bay. Helen listened but did not say much. When Reeves talked about the sound of the sea, Helen finally spoke. What does it say to you? She asked. It speaks of forever, Reeves said. What does it say to you? It calls me, Helen said. It makes me want to go to it. It also hurts me. I can't explain why. It feels like I'm asleep and want to wake up, but I don't know how. Helen looked out over the bay. The sunset light shone on her hair. For a moment, she looked like the spirit of the shore, full of mystery and beauty. She has potential, Reeves thought. The next day, Reeves started his painting. He decided to paint her as a woman waiting by the sea, with sad, longing eyes. It suited her perfectly. When Reeves was not painting, he spent time with Helen. They walked along the shore or rowed her boat in the bay. At first, Helen was shy and quiet. Reeves talked about the big world outside, places he had traveled, famous people, and books. When he mentioned books, Helen's face lit up. I love books, she said. But I almost never see them. My aunt says reading is a waste of time. I read anything I can find, even old newspapers. The next day, Reeves brought a book and read poetry to her by the shore. Helen said, It's beautiful, but her bright, happy eyes said much more. After that, Reeves always brought a book for her. Helen loved the poems and stories. She understood the words quickly and enjoyed the beauty in them. Helen began to talk more. She did not know much about Reeves's world, but she knew everything about her own. She told him old stories about the bay and showed him the hidden beauty of the shore. She had an artist's eye for colors and light. "You should have been an artist," Reeves said one day when Helen showed him a beautiful light on the rocks. "I would rather be a writer," Helen said slowly. "It must be wonderful to write something that the whole world reads and remembers forever." "Some writers are not good people," Reeves said gently. "And many of them are not happy." Helen quickly changed the subject. "Do you know where I'm taking you today?" "No, where?" "To the kelpie's cave," she said. "I don't like it. It feels strange and scary. But I think you will want to see it. It is a small, dark cave. When the tide is low, you can walk to it. But when the tide comes in, the water fills the cave. If you're there when the tide comes in, you cannot escape unless you swim. The rocks are too high to climb." "Has anyone ever been caught by the tide?" Reeves asked. "Yes," Helen said with a shiver. "A long time ago, a girl went to the cave and fell asleep. The tide came in and she drowned. She was young and going to be married the next week. I've been afraid of the cave ever since." The cave was small but beautiful, with shiny sand in front and tall, dark rocks on both sides. "I must come back to sketch this," Reeves said. "You can be the kelpie, Helen. You'll sit in the cave with seaweed in your hair." Helen smiled faintly. "A kelpie wouldn't look like that. A kelpie is a wild, cruel sea creature. It waits here to catch people." "Let's not talk about sea kelpies," Reeves said. "I brought a book to read. You'll like it." When the tide turned, they went back home. "We didn't see the kelpie after all," Reeves said. "I think I will see the kelpie someday," Helen said seriously. "I feel like it is waiting for me in that dark cave, and one day it will catch me." Reeves smiled at her idea, and Helen smiled back brightly. The tide was coming in fast, and the bay was glowing blue in the sunset. At Clam Point, they went different ways, Helen to get the cows, and Reeves to walk further along the shore. Reeves thought about Helen and how much she had changed recently. But soon, his mind drifted to someone else, a beautiful woman he had once known. Helen was forgotten. Summer passed quickly. One afternoon, Reeves decided to visit the kelpie's cave again. Helen couldn't join him because it was harvest time and she was busy. "Be careful," she warned. "Don't let the kelpie catch you. The tide comes in early today, and you often get lost in your thoughts." "I'll be careful," Reeves said with a laugh. He really meant it. But when he reached the cave, he sat down on a rock and started reading. Soon, he was dreaming, and then he fell asleep. When Reeves woke up, he was terrified. The tide had come in, and the water was high. He was trapped. The rocks were too steep to climb, and the water kept rising. For a moment, everything spun around him in fear. He knew he had only minutes before the tide would cover the cave. He leaned against the wall and tried to stay calm, but the waiting felt unbearable. Just then, he saw a small boat coming toward him. Helen was rowing the boat. Reeves felt a wave of relief and joy. He ran to meet her, stepping into the water as her boat reached the rocks. "Helen, you saved me." "How can I ever thank you?" he said, grabbing her hands. But then he saw the look in her eyes, so full of emotion, and he froze. He let go of her hands and stepped back, startled. Helen didn't notice his change. Her voice shook as she spoke. I was so afraid I'd be too late. Aunt Hannah said you hadn't come back, and I knew it was tide time. I felt you might be trapped in the cave. I ran to the marsh, took Joe Simmons' boat, and rowed as fast as I could. Reeves tried to lighten the moment. The kelpie almost got me. It's my fault for not listening to your warning. Let me row now. You've done too much already. Reeves rowed them back in silence. Helen didn't speak, and Reeves didn't know what to say. When they reached the shore, he helped her out of the boat. I'll take a walk to clear my mind, he said. You should rest. Don't worry, I won't let the kelpie catch me again. Helen left without a word. Reeves walked slowly, feeling upset. He realized Helen cared deeply for him, and it hurt him. He had only wanted to help her, but now he felt he had made a mistake. He knew he had to leave soon. The next day, Reeves was sketching on the beach when Helen came. She sat quietly nearby. After a while, Reeves stopped drawing and sighed. I can't focus, he said. It's such a dreamy day. Besides, my vacation is almost over. I'll be leaving in a few days. Reeves avoided looking at Helen, so he didn't see her face go pale. You're leaving so soon? She asked calmly. Yes, I've stayed too long already. My work is waiting for me. I've had a wonderful summer and I'll miss Bay Beach. But you'll come back next summer, right? You said you would, Helen asked quickly. Reeves hesitated. He knew he had to tell her something difficult. Maybe, he said, trying to sound casual, but if I do, I won't come alone. My fiancé will come with me. We're getting married next spring. She's very special to me. Helen sat quietly for a moment. Reeves had worried she might get upset, but her voice stayed calm. Thank you for telling me. She must be very beautiful. She is. Here's her picture. Helen looked at the picture, a beautiful face painted on ivory. It's no surprise you love her, she said softly. She's so lovely. Reeves picked up his book. Shall I read to you? What do you want to hear? Read Elaine, Helen said. I'd like to hear it again. Reeves hesitated. It's a sad story. How about something else? No, Helen replied quietly. I don't like Guinevere. She was loved, even if her love was wrong. But Elaine gave her heart to someone who didn't care, and it ruined her. Please read it. Reeves read Elaine and then held out the book. Helen, will you take this Tennyson as a gift? It's a reminder of our friendship and the Kelpie's cave. I'll never forget how you saved me. Thank you, Helen said. She took the book and placed a small piece of red seaweed between the pages of Elaine. I should go now. Aunt will need me. Thank you for the book and everything, she said before leaving. Reeves felt relieved. Helen seemed calm, and he believed she didn't care much after all. It was just a small infatuation, and she would soon forget him. Reeves left a few days later. Helen said goodbye without much emotion. That afternoon, Helen took the Tennyson to the shore. She walked to the Kelpie's cave and sat on the big rock where Reeves had fallen asleep. The tide was coming in. The waves moved closer, and the water began to cover her dress. She didn't move. As the green water swirled around her, she smiled, A strange, sudden smile. Maybe the kelpie understood.